challenge too. Yeah, no, they definitely came in and three didn't.
Okay. We're about 5 minutes behind schedule, but I thought we'd go ahead and get started for the evening with our linkage session. We still have a couple of people who might come in. I thought maybe just to get the ball rolling, we could do a quick pass around the table and kind of introduce ourselves, and a little bit of information or maybe some years of service with the school district would be great to know. I'm Brian Giannini Upton. I'm entering the second year of my term, and I'm currently the president of the board.
I'm Deborah Lurie. I'm also a superintendent here my term, and I am the vice president of the board.
I'm Tracy Drinkwater, and my service started in 2005 as a paraprofessional substitute.
Can I remind you guys to please use the mics if possible?
Hi, I'm
Thank you.
Tracy Drinkwater, and I started working in the school district in 2005, and then was a para and a teacher and a parent, of course, and then have been on the school board now in my 4th year, and so happy to be here and see you all here.
My name is Ralph Jorgensen. This is also my 4th year on the board. I've got a child at the university and a child that's at the high school.
I'm Sally Lozier. I'm currently the president of the Mercer Island Education Association. I've been with the district for 6 years, mostly as a teacher, 4th and 5th grade, and currently doing some learning support as well.
Susan Hamp. I graduated from Mercer Island High School, and we raised 2 children here. It started in 2001 at West Mercer, and then was at have been at Island Park for over 10 years, and I do music.
Stephanie John Lewis, a 3rd grade teacher, was previously a 4-5, and then a 5, and then a 3rd grade. 26 years in the district, just a few years, yeah. And I have 2 sons that I have put through the district as well, freshman at Boise State and sophomore at the high school.
Okay. Does it work? 1, 2. That works. Maybe I need a half hour for this, but no, I'm just kidding. Okay, my name is Miguel Guerra Kerrigan. I'm working in transportation. 27 years, I'm counting right now. 22 years as a driving instructor, and part of the MIA, kind of representing the classified at large. Thank you.
Hi, I am Valerie P. Ryan. I am the ASB accountant at the high school. I'm in my 4th year at the high school, and I am also the treasurer for MIEA.
Hi, my name is Andy Hamp, and I've been with the district since 2004, and a resident of Mercer Island since 1971. And anyway, I'm happy to be here to meet you and talk with you about issues for the Mercer Island School District.
I'm David D'Souza. This is my 4th year in the board. I have 3 kids in the school district, all in high school, and 1 prepared to graduate this year, so he's in senioritis.
I'm Vicki Mann. I have been working for the district for 20 years now. Teach 7th grade language arts and social studies. This year I'm actually in the library in the afternoon, so I've become the librarian. And I have 2 daughters who both went through Mercer Island High School. They were on Miguel's bus, actually.
And I apologize for being late. Some reason I thought it was 6 o'clock, so I was just doing a little planning at school. But, so I'm Tawny Lindquist, and I attended Mercer Island schools, 1st grade mostly through 12th. And then I started working for the school district as a parapro around 91-ish, and then started teaching in 2006-ish. And I'm the 3rd generation Lindquist to teach in Mercer Island schools. Yeah, my grandmother taught, my aunt and parents both taught on the island. And Melanie? Wow. Yeah, I work at Lizage.
Good evening. I'm Donna Kolaski, second year superintendent here at Mercer Island School District and 34th year in public education. So I'm 35. No. I do have 2 children, and I can still call them children. Although when one turns 30, you start to kind of go, ooh, where'd the time go? But thank you all for being here. And if, can I just keep going? All right. What I'd like to do to kind of start us off is you get to be the first to see a kind of state of Mercer Island School District slide deck. It's not super long, but I think it addresses some of the topics that we put down as mutual interest topics. So we can go through it and then circle back and catch any questions that you might have. I know budget was something that we discussed as a mutual topic, so there's some slides on that as well. Okay. So there we are. And so some of you have probably seen, and it's been up on the website, the focus priorities for, superintendent focus priorities for 2019. And there's 3 components to it, but the main component is the work we do, which is teaching and learning. And so what learning do we want for our students, and how are we preparing our students for their world? And so big components within our teaching and learning, superintendent focus priorities, professional learning. And I've done this slide deck for several groups. I think started with the board last spring in presenting this. So really working to develop and sustain professional learning with a clear focus that's student-centered, focused on the whole child, including social, emotional, and deep learning, utilizes best practice in support of quality teaching and learning for each student, is collaborative and educator-driven. Those of you who are looking at the big screen, I'm really glad you can see it because I've been informed that the bulb is going to go out sometime tonight, so I apologize if it goes out and you might have to swivel your chair to the small screen sometime during the presentation. Also within our teaching and learning, multi-tiered systems of support, and we have a 3-year plan of implementing a child-centered system of tiered support that's inclusive and educates all students at all levels, preschool all the way up through 22, because we do serve students all through that age range. And it includes interventions for core subject areas, also known as in education needs, as RTI, everyone, and social emotional needs. We really are working on that PBIS, and we're in different stages and phases at each of our schools, but everyone is working through that. Inclusive and equitable child-centered education for each student. And so really a focus of assuring equity and inclusion for each student that recognizes students' voice. That has been something that's been really dear to my heart. It's really important that we listen to our students. Through continued review and adjustment to the district's programs, services, our practices, and of course at the board level, our policy. Oh, we lost over the shoulder. Sorry, Valerie, you'll have to swing around. You can turn your back to me. I will not be offended. So within the focus priorities, of course, we also have to talk about administration and operations. And so some bullet points within that, of course, is finance. So fiscally sustainable funding, and with 85% of our budget being centered around personnel, to make sure that we're identifying sustainable funding sources for all of our MISD personnel. And then committing existing and expected resources to support enhanced professional learning and any other program refinements as our advisories and our work groups are identifying them. Here's some of the slides that are part of our MISD budget at a glance. This is a much larger slide deck that is available on our website. We did present this to the board at our last meeting, so we thought it would be good to, and I have to look at it closer here, share this with this group, of course, as well as other stakeholders. So here is a great big pie graph, and it shows our revenue sources. Where does our money come from? You can see the big gray part of the pie is our state general purposes dollars. The blue is local taxes, which of course includes our levy. Orange is local non-tax. The kind of golden color, yellow, state special purposes. And then the darker blue, sapphire maybe, is federal special purpose, smaller amount, and then a little tiny slice of revenue from other sources, pretty marginal. So here's revenue distribution, as we know, for 2016 through 2019. The blue line shows our 16-17 revenues in those same categories as I just showed in the pie chart. The orange shows 17-18, and the gray is 18-19. Something really important to point out here is, yes, you can see in the gray that because of the infamous McCleary fix, our state general purpose revenue did go up. But I also want to draw your attention to the gray in local taxes because of the way that law was written. The change in local levy dollars goes down. This is a timeline that is interesting based on our local levies, which are always a big part of our dollars here on Mercer Island. We have a wonderfully supportive community that has supported our levies ongoing year after year. And the changes are kind of tricky. And it's also tricky in that we as educators all think in school years. We've done it all of our lives. It's the year starts in September, right? Well, the levies don't think in that way. They think in calendar years. So we have these funny things that overlap. So you can see here with the McCleary fix, the formula changed. And it bridged over 2 years. And so in 18-19, you can see we had some collection that occurred in the first part of the year in our November collections at the old levy rate. And then we passed our new levy. That was awesome. But the law only allowed us to collect at a lower rate. So that is the second half of 18-19 and then ongoing through 19-20. And until the law gets changed again, if it does, who knows? Here's our expenditures, another pie chart showing where does the bulk of our dollars go. And you can see, as I already said, 85% approximately is in personnel costs. So blue is our certificated salaries, orange is our classified salaries, gray is all employee benefits, all of our employees' benefits are there. And then different little slices. Purchase services is that dark blue, includes a variety of services, particularly in special ed. Ty, any other big purchase services that I should mention?
Skyward is a pretty big purchase service.
We all use Skyward.
Our participation within the Washington State Schools Risk Management Pool is also a pretty big purchase service.
It's good to have insurance. So there's just some of the contracted services that are embedded in that cost there. So expenditure distribution, same kind of chart as we showed for the revenue. You can see the gray line being the most recent year, 18-19, orange 17-18, and blue for 16-17. So we had a jump in our salaries. We had a bargaining agreement and jump in both our certificated and classified. Employee benefits went up. Surprise, surprise. That's something that's, I think, happened everywhere to everyone every year. And then our other costs, again, purchase services. And I can tell you one of the jumps in that purchase services, now that Ty's mentioned it, was actually in our risk management. We actually had, for the first time ever, a mid-year adjustment made to our insurance of a pretty hefty amount based on problems within the pool that were caused by a lot of lawsuits being brought to school districts. So everybody had a big increase. Staffing, again, 85% of our budget. So what does this look like? We, you can see total staffing. Take out our state apportioned staffing. So that's what we get in, it's all related to the prototypical school model. It's what the state apportions to us for our staffing, both certificated and classified. So in this graph, it's the blue line. On the left-hand side, certificated. On the right-hand side is our classified. Then you have the orange, which is our actual FTE. So all of our employee hours. So you can see there is a gap between the blue and the orange. So we don't receive in our state dollars a full apportionment for all of our employees. That difference is made up by other dollars, including, of course, our local levy dollars. Another factor that we have to consider as we build budget is our enrollment. And so here is kind of a bar graph of our enrollment. The purple, of course, being our projections. We use a demographer study that many districts in the state use. And it's been pretty close and pretty spot on for our enrollment projections. Been a very strange anomaly for 18-19. Many districts were overprojected, and that can be a real calamity for a school budget. Knock on wood, we are projected pretty spot on for where our enrollment has landed for this year, but that's how we build our budget in future year, is making those assumptions in what is our enrollment going to look like. Other operation pieces in human resources, we've implemented a 5-year diversity action plan that we make an annual progress report to the board, and we are really working to support employees pursuing certification. You've all heard about the teacher shortage that's nationwide, and so really trying to help our employees with that. In facilities, this year we have completed a facility survey that evaluates the current status of our buildings, kind of based on capacity and safety and security. And the board initiated a long-range master plan process. The RFP will be going out probably next week. I'm meeting with Brandy actually tomorrow to kind of fine-tune that and get that ready to go out to groups that do that kind of work, as to look at where does the district need to be 1, 3, 5, 10 years out based on our facilities. Okay, next is the work that the governance team has been engaged in since January of 2018. We started way back over a year ago in having discussions in our study sessions about strategic planning, which then led to a discussion regarding our Board Policy 2020, which currently is titled Successfully Preparing Students for the Cognitive, Global, and Digital World. This is an instructional policy. It fits in the 2000s, thus the 2020 number on it. And it does define the district's vision, mission, and value statements. Also embedded in this, and I apologize, it's really small. It's on the website if you want to see it. It also defines our 7 fundamentals, which are measured and monitored annually. And here they are all listed. I'm actually not going to spend a lot of time on these right now, because we're not really, we monitor those and we look at them annually and the language in them, but right now we've done a lot of focused work on the values, vision, and mission. So here's where we are with the work that the board has done after many, many sessions. This is a draft, and you can see that word draft on there. On the left is what the current 2020 says for the values statement, and on the right is the draft statement, which we're going to be seeking further input from everyone on the island, and we'll get to some slides that will describe that process here in a bit. So currently, students are the priority. The draft says, students are the priority. We believe in supporting the whole child, inclusive and equitable learning settings, ensuring our school community is safe and supportive, and providing rigorous and challenging learning. The next statement is about the vision statement, and on the left you can see what the current statement says. And on the right is the draft, inspiring our students to be lifelong learners as they create their futures. A minute to take a look at that. And then the third statement in this part of the policy is the mission. And on the left-hand side is the current mission. And on the right, the draft statement of Mercer Island School District will foster learning by engaging students to think critically, solve problems creatively, and work collaboratively. So what's our next step is engagement with our stakeholder groups to gain input. And in the next few months, the superintendent, hopefully along with board directors, are going to be leading input sessions with these groups here, and not limited just to these groups. So we've started with the leadership team, all the superintendent advisories. There's an equity advisory, a teaching and learning advisory, a student advisory, and a community advisory. School site staff, so being able to go out to staff meetings. Hopefully our principals will allocate us some time to present to staff and gain input from staff. PTA council, meet with them monthly. The school site PACs, some small focused learning groups. Site PTAs as well as the larger PTA, and community groups. In fact, next week I do an annual presentation with the Chamber of Commerce, and we'll present this to them and then let them know that there'll be an opportunity for input for community as well. And hopefully we'll be able to get to some of the service groups such as Rotary and Kiwanis also. So timeline-wise, working on scheduling these meetings through March, which does start tomorrow, April, and hopefully not all the way into May, because May always gets a little bit crazy as we get towards the end of the school year, but really trying to get them the focused face-to-face meetings done in March and April. We'll use a digital tool throughout this whole process to engage the participants and collect input. And then all of that input will come back to the board at their annual June study session, which is scheduled for June 27th. And then any revisions to Board Policy 2020 will follow a usual process that we use when we adopt a policy, which is generally 2 readings, sometimes more. We've had some this year that went 3 or 4, I think, as we talked about the language and debated it a little bit. So with a goal of, in August, potentially having our values, vision, and mission established to where it will move forward from. So you guys are the first to see the State of the District slide deck in its full entirety. I know that budget was a topic of mutual interest, and I also know that the infamous SEB is a topic of mutual interest, and I had no slides on that whatsoever because you probably have as much information on the SEB as we do. We can provide for you the website that has all of the updated information and the FAQs as to, School Employees Benefits Board, which is going to be the new pool for all school employees' benefits come January 1, 2020. So is everyone nervous about this? Absolutely. I mean, that's why the Tums bottle sits in my desk drawer, because every day we get something new on this, something unknown about it. We do know some pieces that are in there that are going to have costs that will be incurred for the district. If you as an individual employee want to know what kind of costs will be incurred for you individually, I apologize, we have no information.
I have some information.
Oh, good, then you can hopefully share with us,
Yeah.
because we don't have a lot on individual.
Put up, however, but there is information out there that's starting to come out, so.
Yeah.
There's some tentative looking,
Do you want to use
this
the
is what
mic,
it might
Sally?
cost.
Can you use the mic?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So there are some tentative sort of cost worksheets that have started that you can access. So I have some of that. None of it is what is totally going to happen. That's not what they're saying. But what they are saying is this is what it's probably going to look like for individuals that are involved in this whole process. So it's out there. You can find it. And I think Tawny's going to be addressing some of this as well.
And not too deeply, but my understanding right now, it's looking like in terms of actual coverage for employees, I think it's one of those situations where employees that are supporting families will probably find that they're saving money in a long run, and individuals who are just getting health coverage for themselves may be paying more. I think it's looking like the plans will pan out if SEB gets funded, and
Right.
that's
But that's
Right,
looking
and
positive, is my understanding.
Yeah, what the latest update I heard from early February was that there was still a commitment in Olympia to find funding. They hadn't found it yet, but it wasn't at that time a question of will we do it, it's just how are we going to do it. So it's looking like it's moving forward.
I would agree with the statement that SEB is definitely moving forward. Everything we're getting out of what's happening in the legislature right now, because they're in session, is that there doesn't seem to be any reluctance to not move SEB forward. I mean, there can always be discussions of, oh, put it off for another year. It does appear that it's going to happen. There's some pieces in it that for us as a self-funded district will be changes for us, and I'm going to talk about a few of them, but Ty might need to jump in because he's much more familiar with, he's attended some of the meetings that the CFOs have gone to. An example being right now, because we are self-funded, if an employee who is eligible for benefits chooses not to take them, we don't have to pay for that as a district. As we understand it right now, how it is written, we will have to pay for every employee who is eligible, whether or not they choose to take the benefit. So interesting cost, but that's sometimes how pools work. The number of eligible hours is different than it's less than what we currently have for our employees. So there will be increased cost for the district for that, because we will have more employees eligible, and the cost for each employee will be higher. So when you multiply those two pieces for a district cost, it's going to be more than what our current benefit part of the pie is that we see now. Ty, any other pieces that you want to add to that?
This is getting kind of into the minutia of it, but we will be, as Donna said, we'll be having to pay for every employee. So that means we'll be paying SEB on a headcount basis. So every employee will be receiving some benefit from it. We will be funded on an FTE basis, meaning that individuals, as they are working for the district, if they're a half-time employee, they're only a half FTE. However, they'll be paying for benefits and we'll be paying alongside with them. So there's concern over, I mean, is there going to be adequate mechanisms to reconcile the fact that we're being funded on FTE when we have that many more heads in the pool? Also, there is no pooling anymore. Previously, the district has combined the available resources of all the members of the unions together to defray some of the cost of individual plans. Pooling is going away. It's essentially every man for themselves, every person for themselves. Let's be correct now. So there is some concern over what is it going to do to the individual premiums. I've heard that there are tentative agreements, and I've seen some of the tentative agreements, but the message that I got from OFM at the presentation was that it is tentative only, and that we shouldn't peg our hats on it, and that it's still subject to change. We don't even know who the providers are yet. That hasn't been released. We don't know what the plans look like. We do know one plan, which will be a mirror of the Uniform Medical Plan under PEB. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. It's a low-cost plan. I was on it when I worked for the state auditor's office. It's okay. And we don't know the bids yet. I don't think they've even gone to bid, the providers yet. So there's still quite a few unknowns. There's still a lot of questions to be answered in the legislature and in the bargaining between ACE, HCA, and the consortium members regarding eligibility. Right now, as it stands, any employee that works for 630 hours is eligible for benefits. That brings the question of substitutes. if substitutes work for a district for 630 hours, they'll be eligible for benefits. So if a sub is working for multiple districts and they reach 630 hours in multiple districts, who's going to pay for the benefits? Or will they have some very excellent coverage? So there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered. The Office of Financial Management, their estimate for implementation statewide, the state portion, the state-funded portion, is $900 million. They estimate the local funding to be somewhere between $260 to $300 million, on top of what districts are already spending for healthcare benefits outside of state funding.
So this is the turnout instead Hub Primero, for example. Oh, sorry. We're gonna use the state.
We don't have an
Health-
option. The law says that every district will be part of the School Employees Benefits Board, which is called SEB.
But
So
within that, there will be different insurance companies offering your insurance, just as you currently choose which of the offered plans you would like to use. That will be the same moving forward into this new piece. So currently projected are a lot of the same companies that we currently have our insurance through. Kaiser's on there, potentially Primera will potentially, it looks like, be part of this. So they're negotiating that right now. So this isn't about going from a known thing to something that's the state and an unknown entity. And it is in fact going to be something that for our end is going to be similar. It's very different for the district budgeting end is very different, but how we receive this should, if all things go as they look like they're going to go, be pretty similar.
So one thing that I have seen is that the HCA and SEB have worked very hard with providers so that there will be about a 90% essentially coverage of existing providers in the WA plans and other self-funded plans, that there should be a 90% acceptance rate of the SEB plans across the state. So odds are very likely that you will still be able to maintain your physicians as we transition.
Excuse me, so the basic question will be, we're gonna pay more, or we're gonna get even, or we're gonna pay less?
as an individual, we don't have that answer.
What we think is going to happen, what WEA thinks is going to happen, is that if you have a family, if you have people you support besides yourself with your insurance, your rates, it looks like, will probably go down slightly. And if you are a single, only covering yourself, there's the potential that it may go up slightly. So that's what they're projecting. Again, this is not set in stone at all. I think 3 of us have said that now. This is just what everybody is making as the assumption moving forward. It has to pass first before anything is positive.
Thank you.
Miguel, I think you phrased it well in terms of what's the impact, what is the impact to the we, to us, and I think that's the individual impact. I think the one that is uncertain, going back to I think what Tani was trying to say in terms of are we hopeful that there'll be funding from the state, and what's that going to look like? So when I think about the greater we, which is all of us, what's the impact? There's a potential major impact to our budget because we'll be paying higher costs for more employees. And I think that's the thing that our superintendent is gulping the Tums down on, and I know our CFO is, with respect to that. And we're all hopeful that it might get covered, but at this point it's not, and it's into the millions. So I think there's the personal we, and then there's the collective we. But you raise a good question.
Thank you, Fred.
You want me to go on from there? I do have some things I would like to say.
On SEB?
It has a little bit to do with SEB, but the first one is just thanking the board for having us here. I didn't have the opportunity to do that. I'm doing that on behalf of Mercer Island Education Association. I think it's really important that we realize our common interests, and this is one of the ways for us to discuss them and move forward. So that's just part of what I wanted to start with. I think if you're ready to move on to the next subject, SEB was one of our important priorities for discussion. I think this was a great way to open that conversation. Thank you.
The other one we had listed was budget. So, went through some of the basic slides of where we are, some of the differences that occurred with the latest flip of how school funding works in Washington State. And as we've already said, the legislature is in session right now, and we get almost daily updates as to what kind of discussions they're having, what are the different committees looking at, what are the bills that are being proposed, what are the bills that are moving forward a little bit more than others. And even though we hear that the legislature is feeling a lot of fatigue when it comes to McCleary, because they've been talking about it and having to deal with it since 2012, there is a realization the fix isn't completely fixed, but what are they going to make adjustments to is somewhat unknown. There's a lot of different things thrown out there, and I know the board directors have been following it very closely as well as to what is what's being pushed. There's also a lot of interest in the legislature to pay some attention to other things in the state besides education as well, even though it's really important to us and it's the biggest part of the budget. I hear lots about how they feel like it's been neglected because they've spent so much time on McCleary. So different things out there have to do with the problem we talked about with the levies adjustment. There's some information about that. Special ed was never really addressed in McCleary, and so just about every district, every superintendent I've talked to uses their local dollars to offset funding in special ed to help meet the costs in that. So there's still a lot of conversation about what are they going to do in the way of special education. No answers, of course, at this time, but all of those are pieces that we have to watch closely as we see what's going to happen within our greater budget over time.
Yeah, and as a local, we're working in Olympia, and so is WEA, of course, to be sure that we continue to get the state funding we need. We believe it's a shared goal. Our hope is that not only is MIEA involved with that, but also you as our superintendent and our school board, and it sounds like you are monitoring that, which is fabulous. I don't know if Tawny has other things on your end.
I did bring the WA legislative priorities. Brian and I had once had a very brief conversation, and you were wondering about them. You may have already received the information, but I thought I'd bring it tonight just so everyone can see what we're focusing on in Olympia this legislative session. And I'm sure you're fully aware there have been just a gazillion bills, so mostly our lobbying team is just trying to keep track of them all and identify which ones are pertinent to our legislative priorities. And I'll draw your attention to the bottom of the page because that's the one that really applies to us the most. So for K-12 employees, looking at cultural responsive training and teaching as a legislative priority, improving and protecting the certification process and fair employment practices. There's been an ongoing trend in Washington State for about a decade now, two different trends in certification. One is sort of hyper-professionalizing things, and that's when we had the pro-teach process, that you hit that 3 years and then had to do almost like a national boards process in order to keep your certification. It was a really heavy lift for our early educators. But on the other side, we have sort of a deprofessionalization process that's also happening, that It's allowing emergency certifications, people coming into the classroom without full training. So it's an interesting dichotomy that's developed in Washington State. So I think that's part of the focus, is trying to, how do we still get educators into the system, as you know, you've put in your priorities, but still ensuring that we have quality instruction in our professional educators. So that's part of that. Student loan forgiveness for educators, protecting union rights and educators' role in education policy, including academic freedom, specifically around age-appropriate LGBTQ subject matter, ensuring that we have access to affordable quality health care, so that's the SEB piece, and providing training for paraeducators, especially with new requirements and certifications for our paraeducators, wanting to make certain trainings available to help meet those requirements. And then the last one is really about that whole levy piece, making certain that school districts aren't being dinged in the whole new funding model.
I think, as we've shared in our superintendent meetings, it's really important to us that we have a partnership in finding ways to help however we can as a local in Olympia. So would love to have, you know, feedback from you, part of the conversation about how can we help.
And I know that in years past, there have been times where we have set down joint teams, both association and board members together, when there are issues that we had common interest in, and thought it'd be helpful to meet with our representatives to advocate for them.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Can I share? This morning I was watching the, I think it was a Monday meeting with the Senate House and Ways Committee, and they were talking about Senate Bill 5313, and that has to do with kind of restoring our local levy capacity. It significantly got dropped down. So this proposal is to, right now, under McCleary, and if I misspeak, please feel free to correct me, I believe we choose the lesser of $2,500 per pupil or $1.50 per assessed $1,000 value. And for Mercer Island, that's $2,500 per pupil. SB 5313 is written such that the school board or school district could choose either $3,500 per pupil, or I believe it's 20%. And in our case, I think the $3,500 per pupil would be the greater of the two, which would be significant. And watching the testimony, I think there were probably about 30 people that came and provided testimony. Bethel, Tacoma, Seattle, White Salmon, Highline, and across the board, from large school districts to rural school districts, everybody was very supportive of it, because it also has to do with levy equalization monies, and it seems like it was written pretty darn well to appeal to all school districts. And I did notice that WEA had their representative there, as well as WASDA had their spokesperson there, as well as OSPI. So of 25 people that spoke, I think there was one person that spoke against it. And I did speak to the legislative assistant today of one of the senators that proposed the bill, and he seemed that they were pretty confident that it will pass. You can't bank on that, but I thought that was nice to hear.
Yeah.
Great, thank you for that, Ralph. And Ralph is serving as our legislative representative for this year as well. So he's the lead contact. And I tend to have my thumb on it as well. So through the Washington State School Directors Association, I'm one of the 4 elected representatives representing Director Area 2 at the legislative committee level, which we helped to organize the Day on the Hill and all that, which was canceled this year. It snowed, and they actually shut down the legislature on that day, so I'm glad I didn't forge through the snow to get there. We're looking at a couple of dates to return with our student representatives and a small delegation to join Director Area 2 to meet with our representatives there. And what WASDA and WASA have decided, and WASBO have decided to do, is to break it down into director areas as opposed to trying to organize everyone across the state again. It's such a big process. So we're trying to get that date pinned down in the director area, and then we'll start reaching out to our representatives. The 21st is the date that the Mercer Island kind of recommended. It works best for us. So we'll see what the rest of the team says. And Director Area 2 is the largest of all the director areas in WASDA. And it's that greater King County. It's kind of the powerhouse block, which is why a lot of us serve on the legislative committee. Yeah. So our big priorities that came out of WASDA this year, leading the top of them was student safety and climate and an all hazards approach to student safety, which is important, and trauma-informed care. Another issue that continues to be on there is dropping from the supermajority in passing bonds and get that down closer to a simple majority, which is going to help especially smaller districts be able to put those capital bonds forward. And then we continue to advocate for the delinking of assessments with high school graduation, as well as expanding those waivers that we can apply for our individual students, so we can ensure that students, regardless of their path, whether it's career or college or technical, that we're able to provide that flexibility for our students. Trying to think. There's three major components, and then each of those has 5 underneath, but they're readily accessible at wasda.org under legislative drop-down menu, and you can find our priorities are listed right there. And they're pretty easy to find for WASA as well. And WASBO does not have theirs published, but I need to reach out to them and see.
And we use those the board used those documents as they had their discussion as to, Brian was doing some of that work as ledge rep before we switched it all up in December, and we used their legislative priorities to, as a board, decide what they wanted to bring forward with WASDA as well. So they are attached to a board agenda. I just can't tell you which one off the top of my head right now.
The other big component was the levy, correcting the levy in McCleary, getting it right, and what are we going to do about special education?
I think it was the December meeting linkage session with our legislators that might be on that one, because we brought it up with them.
And Brian, you reminded me, I didn't talk about all the priorities, but right at the top of our paper under United for Students, you'll see some of those same ones, safe schools. We are having a lot of work around that and training other educators about safe schools, but certainly that's a big priority, and eliminating high-stakes test requirements. And I'm wondering, do you know what's full funding for special education? Because you had mentioned that, Donna. I'm assuming that might be a legislative priority.
It is in there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, one of the things we're facing at the legislative committee, as we're talking with representatives from OSPI and various government agencies, is we were kind of told that to correct special education funding would take upwards of $400 million in the state, which is probably not going to happen. So our pushback, the 30 of us in that room on the legislative committee, was we'll figure out how to make that happen. And what is our wedge? How can we get in there and start forcing that door open? Because we need that funding.
I just would like to add one other thing. The reason I mentioned this whole bill was just I thought there was really good alignment with WEA as well as WASDA. And so I thought that was nice, and I appreciate you sharing this. Our board, I think, over the past 2 years has kind of tried to kind of go through and prioritize legislative priorities for us, starting in the fall, and I guess the goal was so that we could share it with the city, because the city then adopts it as part of their policy somewhere in November timeframe, and we're also meeting with our legislators somewhere around November. So I think it would be nice if we reached out to MIEA kind of in the fall timeframe so that we could take your data in as we go through that process. And just one other thing that I kind of remind our board is we're one of 296 districts. So it's important for us to kind of figure out our priorities, but we shouldn't kind of do an all-stakes debate in order of figuring out, is it 2 or is it 3 ranking or 4 or 5, because we're part of a much larger organization in terms of influencing the state legislature. So we try not to draw too many distinct lines between number 3 and number 4 and number 5. Just try to get the top 5 or top 10.
And fortunately, last year, Director Lurie led the board to develop a resolution 665, which was our school safety and gun violence reduction resolution, which passed, which then opened the door. The Issaquah School Board reached out to us and asked if we would join them and Bellevue and several other regional districts to be signatories on 2 bills that went to WASDA state level this year. And one was on gun violence prevention, and the other was comprehensive school safety. Comprehensive school safety was adopted by WASDA as the #1 priority this year at our legislative assembly. And that's our #1 priority as we go through with legislative priorities. But so it was great for us to be a part of that group that not only brought that to the forefront in the state, and for us here locally, it was Deborah that kicked that off, but it also changed up the standing legislative priorities for WASDA as an organization. They had never had a marker specific to student safety. That was never a specific tier that was called that, and now it is an entirely new tier that's been developed. So it's been great to be a part of that process this year.
I have a question on budget. Microphone, yeah. So as I was looking at the pies and what you had there, the question I had was, how are we doing in relationship to where we thought we would be at this time and year? Yeah, I know it's Ty probably is going to answer it. Where are we in where we thought we'd be at this time with budget, and how are we lining up? Are we lining up well? Are we saving money? Are we going down? Are we right where we should be? How are we doing?
Before, I think there's a little bit of clarification I'd like to add, because in the past 12 months, we've heard concerns from Donna and Ty about district expenditures exceeding the revenues, and we've been told for years. So we went and just researched that a little bit, and we found that between 2013, 2014, and 2016-17, and we haven't, and Mercer Island School District has not engaged in deficit spending except for 1 year when we did spend more than we took in, and that amount was small. It was about $15,000 from what we could figure out. And then for 2017-18, the books are now closed, so we got the reports, so we could look at those. We know what was budgeted and what was spent. The financial picture was better than planned or budgeted. The district actual fund balance, as we figured it out, ended at $1,884,833 million higher than budget. Ty confirmed that number, and that's what was reported to OSPI and MIEA. So the revenue did fall slightly short of spending by about $593,000, but it was much lower than what had been budgeted. The district budgeted, planned, expected to spend about $2.4 million more than it received in revenue, although planned and approved this level of deficit spending didn't occur. So I just think that's an important picture for us to look at, the realization that we are getting a message, but when we analyze the message we've been getting, we're not as highly concerned as it's been expressed to us based on what we've gone through and analyzed. So.
Sure, and I think we have to really make the clarification of the difference between actuals and budget assumptions.
Absolutely.
So when we make those budget assumptions is when we're looking at, so we now have to do part of the McCleary fix, which was an interesting part because there was nothing in the McCleary case that said there needed to be an extended accountability in budgeting, but there is now. There's what is called a future 4-year budget, where we have to look out 4 years, and we actually have to submit that to OSPI for approval. And in that 4-year, you again are making assumptions as to what's going to happen with enrollment, because that's a key factor. What's going to happen with staffing? Is it going to change because of your enrollment? Is it going to flatten? Is it going to be less? Is it going to be more? What's going to happen with your personnel costs? There's always an increase to personnel costs. We all know that because things go up. Certainly there are some of those built in, but we only are given a little bit of information as to what our revenue increases may be for future. So we have to account for all of those when we make the assumptions. So when we say deficit spending, it is based again on the assumptions, not the actuals. So yes, when you look at the actuals, we didn't have that huge big gap, and a lot of that had to do with unanticipated revenue. Easy example was for last school year, in our enrollment projections, we ended up, was it 80 students more, Ty? 80 more students than we had budgeted for. That's a large amount of money. We don't get it right away. You get it much later in the year when you're getting ready to close your budget and do your actuals. So then that impacts really the ending fund balance and the next year out. So that's one example of unanticipated dollars that we didn't know we were going to get, which then changes, okay, now maybe we didn't deficit spend when we get to the actuals. Another piece was in all of the craziness of the McCleary fix. I remember Ty coming into my office late one day and going, I just got a notice we're getting more in transportation dollars. Nothing had front-loaded that. We had no anticipation it was coming. It was something we had not assumed in the budget, and all of a sudden we now had more dollars in transportation that we hadn't anticipated. Very specific to what we can spend it on, but it still then does add to that ending fund balance, and so that creates that larger gap there. We have something called safety net in special ed that every year we have to go through an extremely rigorous process. Fred has staff in learning services that spends days going through compliance documents. It breaks my heart a little bit because a lot of that is staff that can be working with students, but they're spending an abundance of time doing compliance through IEPs so that we can then submit all of that to OSPI, and we recoup in safety net anywhere from $500,000 to $700,000 has been our experience previously. But again, how do you budget that if you don't know you're going to get it, because you have to fill out these compliance documents? So our practice has not been to budget safety net, at least while I've been here, and when Ty had budget turned over to him, it wasn't something that we had anticipated. So we do have unanticipated revenue that comes in. Certainly there's always unanticipated expenditures. Another example being last year when mid-year the risk management pool sent every district in the pool a bill because of increased costs due to sexual abuse cases against students that had come forward at a higher rate. For us, that was $100,000 that we didn't anticipate. So this really needs to be clear between our assumptions of budget when we build it, that certainly, yes, our assumptions are if we continue with this number of students and this number of employees, and our employees have more experience, no more staff mix anymore, so the cost of our employees goes up. What is that going to look like? How do we budget for that? And so we did make an adjustment to our budget in October. We took it back to the board because of this new process. OSPI originally said you have to submit a budget. We did, and originally our fourth year out was negative. And then OSPI came back and said, okay, districts, you've all now negotiated. We need you to resubmit this. As good compliance people that we are, Ty and I worked really hard, and we resubmitted it and found out we were one of very, very few districts that did do that. But we worked really hard to present a 4-year projection that is balanced, but in the fourth year out, that ending fund balance is less than $1 million as it looks right now. But again, it's based on assumptions. Are they conservative assumptions? Yes. An example being our enrollment is projected as being flat, no enrollment growth. Our growth has been pretty minimal anyway, so we feel relatively comfortable with that. We're not projecting declining, which can again be problematic as well. So that means staff numbers are flat as well. So those are some of the pieces within the 4-year projections. Didn't show that, but if you want to look at it, it's part of the budget presentation that was on the last meeting that's available on the website.
Andy, this will be a great time to
I
ask
do.
your question.
I do have a question. It sounds good that we feel that the budget is working well for Mercer Island School District at this point. Would you agree with that? Or does it feel that you don't, that it's difficult to get information, to put it all together, all the pieces together to figure out where we are at as a district? I mean, that's the question I've got is, how hard is it to get a handle on the budget? Is that something that's always like a black hole that you don't know what it is?
I'm going to take a swing at it, again, correct me. Kind of as a board member, I think I speak, we have a tremendous responsibility with this public entity. We approve the levies, the bonds, and we need to make sure that we're in the positive. And I just want to reiterate what the superintendent said about the variables in putting together these budgets. We've got enrollment. We have the safety net. This is essentially a grant application, hoping that the state will reimburse us for that. The schools foundation, our administration in these projections is actually having to count on income on donations. That's a pretty uncomfortable position, because that's not legally required collection there. That's a donation. So, and then I think, Tawny, you remember, I forget what the word was, but when they were going to potentially ratchet down before McCleary, the 36% to the 32%, there was a concern about the bridging of our levy rate. And then at the last minute, the state legislature, the levy cliff. And then at the last minute, the state legislature allowed us to collect an additional 4%. So these are, I think, best predictions that are kind of a little bit on this conservative side, because we have to make sure that we end up in the black, because the worst thing we can do as, I think, a board is to go in the red, because then the confidence that we rely on this public to support this wonderful education system, if we go in the red, it's not responsible.
Isn't it also prohibited by law for a school district? That's not allowed.
Yeah. But
just to make sure there's protection.
But there have been school districts that have, and then they have massive layoffs.
Yeah.
And so we don't want that to happen.
So, and I'll just wrap up. In many school districts on these new 4-year plans are actually way in the red. I've learned a lot with Ty's presentations. I think we all have. They're all public. They're all publicly available, and I think now they're being updated on a kind of a quarterly basis, just because so many things are in the move. And I think in terms of, it's very transparent. We have the operations, and we've got a fund balance, and there's no other place that the money is in. And I understand sometimes that there's concern about the size of the fund balance, but because the fund balance was at a certain height, that just kind of implied we were saving, and then we could just distribute it as we are now over the next 4 years projection. And also keeping in mind, we were able to save the public about $9.8 million on the $100 million bond project, because we had a healthy fund balance, which gave the people who purchased our bonds a lot of confidence, and they were AAA rated, and they actually paid a premium for it, saving the public $9 million. So that's
Right.
kind of the whole dynamic.
All right, and then in the future, the state funding anticipates these increased costs. I'm assuming that they would be giving more money percentage-wise to cover the higher costs for the school districts.
Go ahead, Ty.
As we stand now, the additional revenues that the state is looking at passing to districts relate specifically to either SEB or SPED. There is nothing in the bills that I've seen that relates to adding, well, there are some bills that add staffing for mental health care, social workers, school nurses. There is continued reliance on K-3 class size reduction funding. Compliance will be coming next year unless something changes. But I haven't seen anything from my sources about additional staffing. I haven't seen anything about additional changes to the statewide salary allocations. I haven't seen anything about changes to...
So there's nothing for like cost of living adjustments or...
So we haven't seen anything about the IPD increases that they're projecting. Those will, once we get actual budgets from the legislature, then we'll start seeing more. But right now, IPD for 2018 was 2.1%. So there's, it's not much that we'll be getting from the state. Previously, under the old levy system, our levy revenues managed to grow with our state revenues. So as state money increased, we got more levy authority to match it. Now it's, state funding has gone up and it's plateaued, according to OSPI and all the projections. Our expenditures have gone up and are plateauing. Our levy authority, instead of going up to match it and meet it, is just flat. And if I'm hoping we stay pretty steady in our student enrollment, but if student enrollment starts to decline, our levy, since we're based on per student revenue now, could decline as well. So those are things that we need to have in consideration. Is what's the long range enrollment projections? What are the trends and demographics as we look for is the future gonna be stable for funding? So right now, according to all projections, we are pretty much flat moving forward for the next 4 years in terms of revenue. Small, tiny increases in CPI or IPD, but that's budget dust, really.
So we're really kind of hoping that there'll be maybe a legislative fix that will occur, maybe this year, I don't know, or...
I think the other thing to think about would be the local levy and how that's increasing. You saw the staff mix slides that showed what the state apportions us, and then the additional comes from local levy. Not only does it come from local levy, but also schools foundation donations and PTA donations. And school foundation and PTA donations don't have an IPD or a CPI inflation adjuster in them. And as we're seeing right now, there's tension between the different communities, whether it's mental health counselors and school foundation breakfasts going on, as to where people are providing their donations to. So our staffing mix, big issue. The fact that, as Ralph had stated earlier, donations, and that's a large chunk of money. That's 1.5 million from the schools foundation. Typically, we've seen that come in at about $1 million. And from the PTAs, that's also about another $1 million and decreasing as well. So that's a real challenge to fund the staff mix that we'd like to fund. So how do we adjust our budget to be less reliant on these type of donations is going to be a big question for the board as well. It's scary when, come May, we don't know how to hire because we don't know what our donations that are coming in. So I think we'll be looking at that challenge. And then additionally, I think we've also talked about a number of different programs that we're thinking about. When we talk about school safety, I mean, that's social emotional learning, really. We've had that for a long time, but the redoubling and looking at its effectiveness, coming out with more standardized curriculum around that, being more thoughtful about how that plays out will lead to more expenses in curriculum and programming. As we think about, 21st century education, when we come into play with technology and computer programming, just about every subject somebody could go into needs computer programming now. Fixing a car, fixing a bicycle. Just to fix my bicycle, you need to be a computer programmer because there's all these digital gear shifters now. So we don't offer these services to our kids at the age they need it. And so as we start thinking about that as well, what do we do? Mental health counselors, as we've seen, are at risk right now because of cuts at the city level. And that's pretty key to school safety. And how do we think about funding that? And there's certainly a gap for the next few years that has to be thought through. And it's pretty significant. There's about $750,000 that go into that. The city has $1.2 million of additional cuts they want to make. And you look at our fund balance projected out 4 years at $950,000. It's a scary place for our kids to be right now when we think about all these expenditures that are possible. Now, I don't think we really have to, think about, do we do them all? I don't think we can do them all right now, that's for sure.
Yep.
So I'm the non-numbers person here, and the way that I look at things is more value-driven. And I, as a government employee myself, we all, at the end of the day, is, well, how is this going to affect me and my family, right? Fundamentally, that's what we're here for. And I just want to assure MIEA that the board has that same priority. Our priority is our students, and we know that our teachers are the most important predictor for the success of our students. So we hope, and I think, have made decisions accordingly that demonstrates our support of our teachers and staff. That isn't going to change because we know what matters. We're not always going to agree on all the numbers, but we're here and would welcome you. We rarely have public input. Feel free, if you think that we're not or audience members, if you think that we're not getting the information that we should be getting, please come share with us, or by email, or however that might be. Our priority is making sure the way that we looked at bargaining in my one time is how much can we give our teachers or our employees while still making sure that our students are getting what they need, including both their services and programming. But it isn't how much can we get away with not giving teachers, it's how much can we, like what is the safest level, like how high can we go where we're comfortable with maintaining fiscal responsibility for a district. That is our goal. That's what happened in bargaining last year in terms of how we approved things, and certainly as long as I'm going to be involved, that's my intention. But that was certainly the board's position when we went through bargaining last year. I don't anticipate that changing. So thank you for all that you do, and we want teachers to be living locally and successful and able for their kids to be doing the things that everyone else does.
Thanks for that, Deborah. I really appreciate, as a member, that you made that statement. I think we're very proud of the bargain that we went through. We feel that it's putting Mercer Island in a really competitive place to attract great staff and hold on to them. So thank you for that decision and for working with us.
So following with that, Deb, thank you. One of the things that, and also what you were saying, David, one of the question I have is the priority for me for paraprofessional support, as well as the counselors, which you've already spoken to, and tying that into safety and social emotional. Coming from Island Park, and I've been there for 10 years, and back in the heyday, the hand-in-hand program was just amazing, where every single grade level had a parapro that knew those students inside and out, and so important. And we still have that model. We've lost paraprofessionals over the year, and we're sharing them more, and but there's still Libby Watipka, who she knows those kids. So, I mean, all of them, they know those kids, and it's so important. And I'm hearing that, I know that it's difficult for the PTAs to be raising a lot of money, and that's a lot of stress on them. Is there something in the future about with the district on the support of the paraprofessionals, and knowing that, at least for me, I know how important they are to the student, whole child and well-being.
So I think you're pointing out an individual piece, which is, difficult to have a conversation across the district, because our perspective as the board, and mine as the superintendent, is we have to make sure that, as some of the priorities were stating, that we're inclusive, but we're also offering that equitable educational access to all our students across the district. And so that becomes difficult when you have some districts that, because of donations, are able to raise more dollars and have been supporting positions that other schools can't raise those kind of dollars for. So how do we make sure that our students are being served in an equitable educational opportunity across the district is the question that we, as certainly a leadership team, as well as a governance team, have to be looking at and making sure that we're providing that for all of our students. Doesn't answer your question directly as to the specifics to Island Park, but leadership team is working directly with the administration and the PTAs on how to best meet the needs of every student in the district.
Yeah, and I think Susan's question actually has more to do with the social-emotional side of this, in that para support across the district is extremely important because it provides students with a continuous connection in a building. So they may meet a para in first grade, but that same para is still in the building, out on the playground, wherever they happen to be working, all through a student's experience in whatever school that they happen to be in. So that's part of that social emotional, that piece where we're looking to say, some schools right now have more or less, but that's not the piece we're really thinking about. We're thinking more about how are we using our budget in the district to make sure that the teacher that is with an elementary school student isn't the only one that's building that connection, that there's a connection that goes throughout that helps with that social connection, the emotional connection to a particular school. And I just want to piggyback on top of that, because, as David said, we are looking at a cut in counselors coming from Mercer Island Youth and Family Services, so city funding. Mercer Island's unusual in that we are taking an outside funding source to fund our counselors. There are other models. One of them is in Issaquah, where Swedish hospital counselors are actually contracted but paid by Issaquah School District. So it's a different kind of model. And one of the questions that we have is, are we looking at other models when thinking about trying to alleviate what we're seeing as a pulling away of really important services?
Absolutely, but I do want to reiterate a very simple phrase. Mercer Island is an awesome place, and we have an awesome school system, and I think it's all about continuing to grow and continuing to grow the work that we're doing. However, particularly when we think about budget, Mercer Island can do anything, but we can do everything. So absolutely, if the board looks at myself and Ty and says, find a way to fund the mental health counselors that the city has been funding, we'll sharpen our pencils and we'll do that, but there'll be something else that will have to go, because we do have to have that balanced budget as well. So it is that prioritization of And I agree with you completely. I just want a quick point on the social emotional learning, and that's why the professional learning is for every single employee in our organization. We've been working with our bus drivers on how do you work with kids. You're the front line. You see those kids first thing in the morning, and you get a sense when you see those kids every single day. I know we have bus drivers who see kids year after year after year after year, and they're that front line for if a kid's not having such a great day and is there something going on. And so how do we help them have the tools in their tool belt to meet the needs of our students social emotionally as well? So that comes from that emphasis on professional learning for everyone.
And I would just piggyback on that, I know at the last development Wednesday early release that we had, a lot of the paraprofessionals were there, and there were some that were saying that they had never gotten this information before. So this year I'm really seeing an increase of the paraprofessionals being invited and encouraged to come to the development. So that's exactly what you're saying.
Which we really
Yeah.
appreciate and respect the professional inclusion of them as important staff members in our schools.
I just want to point out that we have looked at that model in Issaquah, and I believe they may get the school district may get some funding from some other places, but they also don't have nearly the level of service that we have provided. It's a, per student, it's a much lower rate. And so while it looks really great, Swedish is just like Youth and Family Services is to us, and we find a way to get the money there. But the level of service that we have is a gold standard, and we would love to do everything that you're all talking about, especially when it comes to social and emotional health. But it is about being fiscally responsible and what can we afford and where are the highest priorities for students, but also what can we sustain. And be equitable. I mean, these are all great things that we have been talking about for many, many months, and I would encourage people to come to our meetings, or hopefully you're watching them at home, because we talk about these things often. And so sometimes it seems like people are hearing things for the first time, and it's not that we're saying it for the first time.
So on the funding of programs, are we kind of in a box where we can't go out to the public and say, we would like to have a levy that would raise money for school counselors, or
correct? We are in a box,
right? So okay. So what about maybe we can't do this because we can't guarantee that we're sustaining it, but we do ask for donations from the public, and I believe that the community would support that concept, perhaps. Maybe they wouldn't support an entire bond issue that the city had, but maybe there's parts of it that our community finds valuable, and maybe more valuable than the city does, perhaps, that we could look.
I can address your concerns. So the school board sent a letter to the city last year about this time asking them to put a standalone levy for mental health counselors, for DCYF, both in schools and then also senior services, things that they do for the city. This is a position we've been advocating for. We can't do it, the city can. So I would strongly encourage MIEA to go to city council, talk if it's your position, give them the public input and say that it's your priority, because they can do it. If we could, we would have already done it. We're looking for a sustainable funding model, which is why we're trying, as Donna said, we can choose to do it. And I don't, it's a priority, but we also don't want to have this problem every year like we've had every year of wondering whether or not it's going to get funded. So the only way to do that is a sustainable funding model, which a levy would manage, and there's other ways too, but it means that we're cutting in other places.
So I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, and so we started a little bit late, but we're now moving over. I know that Director Jorgensen has some comments. I want to make sure everybody has a chance to make some final statements or questions, clarifications in there. I did want to also mention that there is a coalition that has come together, and kind of ad hoc coalition, through the Youth and Family Services Foundation. that is meeting together, who's looking at several different options of what could a standalone levy look like, what could a joint temporary fix through Youth and Family Services Foundation and the Schools Foundation. And there's a lot of work happening to try to make sure those counselors are kept whole in the short term while we figure out, as a district and a city, how that interlocal partnership can maintain that in the long term.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to share, I think we have so many shared values. And I just want to share with you some of the work that we've been doing. You know, we're lucky to live in the community that we do because people truly value education. I believe if we put forward what we would do with the money and our plans and things, we could get the public to exceed, unfortunately, what the state caps as our limited state funding. The state caps our funding, and our community maxes it out, as well as the donations. As Director Lurie mentioned, with the mental health counselors, which is truly a best practice for social and emotional learning, for preventing teenage suicide, 5,000 children a year in the U.S., for preventing school-based violence. It's a best practice to prevent all that. But it's a public health issue. And so towards that end, the city has additional levy capacity. And that's why we asked the city if they could fund that and continue to fund it. It allows us to use our limited education dollars for education and maximizing our education. And there is the ability for the city to add to levy capacity for public health, for the mental health, for geriatric counseling. Because we have these kids 15% of the time. They also belong to the community too with respect to, and that's what public health dollars are about. So we are trying to be as most efficient with our dollars for education.
Right. Good point. Any other questions, comments, or?
Well, considering the time, I'm going to be brief, try to. My position in the MIA is classified at large. That means I represent a lot of parapros, school bus drivers, obviously, and in the past 22 years. And it's my passion to talk to them, to see what the concerns are, and what is the things that coming from Olympia or coming from the district to address those concerns. And something is coming up, and probably you guys know this, is let me to understand where it's coming from. WEA have 90,000 members, and the classified members is around 13,000, more or less 15% of the. And the group of classified members, they have different actions, committees and stuff like that. And one of those committees went to Olympia to address the, put together a proposition for bring the parapros, classified people, to the education standard. That means they have to have a prerequisite. So in the year 2017, they're coming up with the law, which is the HB 3155. And you can see in the RCW 28A 413 talking about parapros. And what is this? And these are requirements that, and probably our superintendent know, that start in September. The para-educators have to have 5 certificates. One of those is the, and I have this brochure here, one is advanced certificate, and they explain what is the requisite they have to have. The general certificate, the all subject matter certificate, the special education subject matter certificate, and the fundamental course of the study. Now, the law address the parapros have to have received or passing grade on the education texting service para-educator assessment, hold an associate in arts degree, have earned 72 quarters credits or 48 semester credits at an institution of higher education, or have completed a registered apprenticeship program, which was created in 1980. Today, I made a phone call to the Parapro group board. It's in Olympia. And I talked to one of the guys, and they tried to understand what is all this. But guess what? Always coming from Olympia, rules, laws, but they're not funding. So we have a problem, right? And so they told me right now they're working in Olympia, they are in the session, and they're going to try to coming up with the money. Now, these people, they have to fund these four requirements. They have to have, no matter what, the fundamental course of the study, no matter what. They have to have that. Now, some school districts need to training people and provide with the study of fundamental from the education to support them in the classroom. But my concern to you is the follow. We have this law, wonderful, this elevate the category of the classified, but I asked this question to the legislator and the question to the creator of this law. How about grandfather the people? It is working. They have 5 years, 10 years, 12 years in the school district. We're going to fire them? And they said, no, they don't consider that. They fought this, they discussed this, and I'm going to push in to our WEA to fight with this because it's not right. What are we going to do with the classified? They're already working in the district, and they have a lot of experience. I love the university. I love studies, but the university don't teach you the practical stuff in the schools, and you need to consider that. You need to find it in your budget, or find it something that hold it into the our grandfather. Our classified.
Miguel, just in the interest of time, I do want you to know WA has been working on this issue for many years.
Okay.
As has the district. In fact, last year we worked very closely with Sally's predecessor on our employees, and we did have some employees who had worked for us for many years who were not going to meet the requirements, and we worked hand in hand with them. And Aaron, Executive Director Battersby, I think we had 3 or 4 at the end, but all of them are now considered qualified and are able to continue. And the other law that you're citing certainly is something that we're watching as well, and Human Resources is working on it. Erin, do you want to elaborate briefly at all?
Yeah, very briefly, I'll just say that the district is closely monitoring, as are most districts, and I actually think the union leadership, well, we've worked closely together to ensure that, because grandfathering really wasn't on the table, that we maintain the staff members who are already working for us and had already demonstrated they're very good at working with our children. So we're able to keep good staff members through a joint effort. And like we offer the tests that you referenced, I think some of the other things that you were talking about also relate to, hinge on whether or not funding comes down the pike from legislature. So we're just going to sort of wait and see. Just to address, I'm not sure if this was in your presentation, Miguel, so I apologize, but there is some question about the education that'll be required in the upcoming years. starting next year, but we can't actually front load that education options because if they take it now, it doesn't count. So, and we are not one of those pilot districts where they sort of did a test run. So we are looking at that. We are closely monitoring that, and I anticipate that Sally and others and will continue working because we do want to keep our talented staff who take care of our children.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I just want to thank the school board for inviting us in again and continuing the partnership that we've had in the past, and I'm looking forward to that partnership continuing in the future. We'd really love to have more interaction with the board and are having members come and attend meetings, take notes, or watching them on the television to make sure that we're keeping track of what you're doing. So just know we are paying attention, and we do appreciate how hard you work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
And
thank you for all
can
that
I
you do
just
with our
say a quick
students.
thank you, Brian? Thank you for all the bargaining, for being in this district for 26 years. I know the past couple years I've stood up at meetings asking please, please, and now I just want to say thank you. It has made a difference to be able to put my son through college, and knowing that I have 15 more years in this district, and I am excited to be here. And never have I been on the MIEA like I am this year, and I'm learning so many new things, and I appreciate all that you guys do for us. So for all of the staffs, I know we do appreciate everything you guys went through last summer and our bargaining team. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely a heartfelt thank you for all that you do for our students and our community here, and that we know that many our staff members come from off the island in order to take care of our students here, and so we're very grateful for your dedication, your energy, and the passion that you put into it, because this is it's a field of love and passion, right? So thank you for your expertise and everything that you bring. And if you'll notice, we've done some adjustments in our agendas. More often now, you're seeing budget reports and financial reports coming in the consent agenda on a regular basis to help keep our community at pace with what's happening and what we're actually seeing kind of in more real time. Also, as far as the mental health counselors, there's a new space in here where we are reporting and discussing in every regular meeting that coalition and kind of information coming out to help you keep informed. And if there's ever a question from members of your organizations of how to interact with the board, whether it's a public input or it's a public hearing, and knowing that you can come down to the table and ask questions, and when those happen, just reach out, and we're happy to let you know how you can interact with us in that public forum. But also, never hesitate to reach out and talk to us. We have a clear hierarchy that we follow of mutual respect, responsibility in the district, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you and what your experience is, because that informs the work that we do in policy up in the balcony, right? So, thank you. So we're going to take a quick recess, and let's come back at
Jacket on without making a lot of
Making a lot of noise.
6:40.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Okay, let's call to order our regular meeting. It's at 6:45 p.m., a little late this evening, on February 28th. First up, establishment of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor, please say
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, so the agenda is established. First up, we're going to go with Section 3, Part B, public input. I don't see anyone. Okay. So we'll move to 3C, the superintendent's update.
So I have a couple of things to communicate to the board. First up, our Mercer Island High School principal, Vicki Puckett, has been named the very first inaugural Principal Advocate Champion for the National Association of Secondary School Principals. And so just to give you a little bit of what this means, in the recognition that was written up, it says, when it comes to being an advocate, there's nothing more important to Vicki than ensuring that all students have equal opportunity to great public education. I see a lot of disparities in education, Vicki said in an interview, citing that many schools are critically underfunded compared to those in more affluent areas. I've always been a champion for kids who don't have all the resources of others, particularly students of color. I believe part of our job as principals and our mission as educators is to tell students stories to elected officials. We need to take a more active role because legislators remember these stories when they go to make decisions about policy. And during National Principals Month in October, she organized 2 shadowing visits with our federal and state lawmakers, U.S. Representative Adam Smith and State Rep. Tana Sen, inviting them to the high school to spend a day in the life of a principal and see what challenges public schools are facing today. Vicki's also played a leading role with the Association of Washington School Principals in developing multi-organizational coalitions of educators and educator leaders in her state. Notably, an AWSP committee she serves on recently collaborated with the Washington State Association of School Administrators, WASA, to compare the legislative platforms of the 2 organizations. Through that collaboration, they identified a set of common goals that included funding the key state education programs and additional support for social and emotional learning. From there, they developed a joint platform to unify behind and advocate towards. By facilitating communication between the organizations, Vicki and the AWS team helped ensure that Washington lawmakers will hear a more powerful united message from both principals and superintendents in the upcoming legislative session. So she's not here, and she'd be really embarrassed if she was, but I wanted you to know about that recognition for her because she is definitely a strong advocate for students and is ready to hopefully head to the Hill with us and our student reps in a reorganized event. Just a couple other things to note. Our high school student musicians in band and orchestra had 11 category winners and many first and second alternates at the Regional East Shore Solo and Ensemble Festival held in Bellevue. And the winners qualified to compete at the WIAA-WMEA State Solo and Ensemble Contest at Central Washington University in Ellensburg in April. Our PTA Council will honor 24 students with district awards at the annual Reflections Arts Competition. This actually was initially postponed because of our Snowmageddon, but it has been rescheduled, and we will celebrate all of the students at a reception on Monday, March 4th at 6:30 in the Commons at Islander Middle School. And so if any of you are available to attend, I would love to see you there. Their theme for this year's competition is Heroes Around Me. And let's see what else. We've got some more WIA honors and team activities for our high school. The choir is directed by our new director, Annalise Sanborn, and is the 3A academic state champion with a combined GPA of 3.762. with Distinguished Scholastic Awards going to our Symphonic Orchestra, our Symphonic Band, and Drama. Also our Varsity Boys Basketball with a GPA of 3.44. And Outstanding Scholastic Awards go to our Varsity Boys Wrestling, our Varsity Girls Basketball, and our Varsity Gymnastic. And also we scheduled, and I just wanted you to be aware of it, because of our snow days, our MIHS Biology Symposium, and it will be held now on March 5th from 6 to 8 in the Commons at the high school. It's a great event if you can manage to get to it and listen to the students. And they've all been working on their projects. They have posters and other boards, and sometimes they even have demos of what their project is. And they're almost all of them are partners or team projects, so they have to work together in their presentations. It's a great event. I was thrilled to be able to attend it last year. And there's a lot of social emotional learning goes on. A very simple example was the student who rushed up to Mr. Vengenito needing a quick lesson in how to tie his tie before he went out to present. So lots of learning that's presented. So hopefully you might be able to attend that rescheduled event. And that's all for now.
Great. So we will then move on to Section 4A, the Superintendent's Annual Summative Evaluation and the extension of the Superintendent's contract. This is an action item. The board has worked in executive section to compile the summative evaluation. Do we officially vote here on the two separate things, the summative evaluation and finding compliance, and then also with the third amendment to the employment contract? Okay. So I wanted to, well, this document is available upon request. It's not something that we put into board docs, which is the official summative evaluation. To explain it, in the center of it, it goes through the fundamental reviews and our operational expectations, which were reviewed throughout the year, and the superintendent has been found in compliance of all these, and there are three major pieces there. But I wanted to first just highlight some of the overarching accomplishments that we saw and wanted to highlight for you from this past year. One area that we saw great progress in was in student voice. The program implementation and supervision of the student representatives onto the board, that's Board Policy 1250, Students on Governing Boards. Also your work with the high school band who headed to the Rose Bowl, and that district-to-district collaboration, the trip and the preparation. And then also the work that was happening with highly capable and special education audits and reviews that were currently led in our district, and the ongoing work that comes with that. And then, as always, your ongoing priority toward highlighting student accomplishments in community publications and at public meetings. We also highlighted your work with staff support and new hires, successful bargaining with the Mercer Island Education Association, professional, technical, and administrative support, and facilities support. Your continued community engagement around the updated radio communication systems to better support emergency management procedures, continued work to strengthen the city district interlocal agreements, new parent guardian notification system, and a reset of the Superintendent's Equity Advisory Council, which is newly branded and newly focused, is focusing. And the prioritization toward strengthening staff-student community relationships. We also highlighted strategic planning and finance in the document for your ongoing work in those areas and support to the board. And then towards the back, this is the more official area. It says, based on the board's prior acceptance of these reports and the ongoing monitoring of the organization of the superintendent's performance during the preceding year, the board reaches the following conclusions relative to the superintendent's performance. So I think this is a statement that we'll be voting on. One, the superintendent has reasonably interpreted and operated within the boundaries established by the operational expectations as stated in Board Policy 1800. 2, the superintendent has reasonably interpreted and made reasonable progress in fulfilling the fundamentals as stated in Board Policy 2020. And 3, the superintendent is in full compliance of Board Policy 1605. Based on the foregoing conclusions, the board makes the following decision for the coming year. This will be what we'll vote on here. As a demonstration of our confidence in your work, we would like to roll forward your contract up to 3 years, which is the maximum amount allowable by Washington state law. The Mercer Island School District is locally, regionally, and nationally regarded as an extremely high-performing school system, and you have done an exemplary job of leading our district and navigating some complex financial, policy, and student safety issues in a highly professional manner. So I would take first a motion to approve the summative evaluation, accept the summative evaluation.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
Thank you for being such a wonderful superintendent and making this an easy decision, I think, in my opinion, to roll forward your contract and to give you an outstanding review.
I just want to say thank you and highlight, I appreciate you have made my first year on the board a tremendously positive experience. I learned a lot, and I have taken your lessons, to the greater everyday life. So thank you for being a mentor to me, I think for the board, our staff, and our students as well.
I'll just say thank you.
Agreed, thank you, and I'll echo all those comments.
Yes, okay. Without any further comments, the motion is to accept the summative evaluation, approve the summative evaluation. All right. Is to approve 1605P, the annual summative evaluation. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Seeing none, it is unanimous. All right.
And then do we also need a motion to approve the contract amendment?
Yes, and it's the third
So-
amendment to the contract.
I move that we approve the third amendment to Donna Kolaski's employment contract.
Second.
Discussion. I see no discussion, so just so it's clear, the agreement is that a 3-year term of the contract is hereby extended by 1 year with an amendment termination date of June 30th, 2022. The terms of the contract, not inconsistent with this third amendment, shall remain unchanged and in full force and effect. Okay. Any questions, other comments? No. All in favor of
Aye.
amending the contract? Say aye.
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 There we go. Any opposed? No. All right. So the contract is amended, the third amendment to the employment contract. Whew. I'm going to practice this script for future. All right. Any final comments on that section? No. All right. Then we will move into the consent agenda, section 5.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Okay, the consent agenda is accepted, passed, and so we will move on to the superintendent's report, section 6A.
So I am going to pass down, I'm going to go kind of old school and pass out some papers to you. These are the documents that have been updated, so to speak, for the candidates information workshop that will be occurring right after our special meeting at Island Park. We will need to go back to the boardroom at the district office because it will be problematic during school hours to try to use the facility at Island Park. So it will start at noon after our meeting. So there's 3 documents here. One is set up sort of as a frequently asked questions. So if you want to take one of those to look at. The second is a slide deck that was previously used, and so it was updated to have the correct date on it, and changed out some of the things that weren't relevant, and works through the same pieces that were there before. And then this last document is linked, so you won't be able to see the links, but it is the links to 3 documents that WASDA has online, so any candidates would be able to look at these if they so desired. What does the school director do is the title of the first. Being an effective school director is the title of the second, and running for school board is the title of the third. So hopefully all of these documents will provide you as leaders for future candidates during the workshop in supporting them. Some other things we thought would be prudent to have available would be copies of the most recent annual report. Another piece I'm not sure if you've used before that we could maybe provide a link or some copies of is the King County Electoral Handbook that is a little bit lengthy, but we could perhaps make a couple of copies available if you thought that that would be a valuable tool for any candidate. So these are the documents that were used previously. We've kind of updated them so they would be ready for use. If you have any suggestions or changes, we still have time to do that. And then we'll post them on the agenda when the agenda is ready, so people will have that digital access to them.
Questions or comments? I did notice that King County has also released some new videos and information on So You Want to Be a Candidate. Yeah. So you think you want to be a candidate. So, and I noticed that on their Facebook page just today, a link to that. Good resource. Okay, so let's move on to Section 7, Board Announcements, Inquiries, and Reports. The Legislative Representative Report.
I pretty much gave the report during our linkage session with the MIEA, so if anybody has any questions on that, please feel free to ask me. Otherwise, just direct people who are watching this to watch that linkage session.
Any other questions or?
Is there something we should be doing to advocate for that in any way? They do accept feedback, I believe, on the bills.
You know, after watching the Senate Ways and Means Committee meeting, it was very well commented on by probably 25 people. And based on my discussion earlier today with the legislative assistant and their thoughts of the likelihood of it passing, I don't think there's an immediate action, but what I will do is reach out to them and ask them directly and see if they have any suggestions, and then report back to you next week. Does that sound good?
And for those who are curious, you can always go to the legislature website and track down that specific bill. It'll show you where it is in the process and when it's being bounced to the other house or any areas. I think at this point, comment is not as effective. The time for comment and input has kind of happened. But since it's so positive, I think just providing that continual positive feedback to any of the legislators you have contacts with is good. Yeah. Okay. We'll move on to 7B, the Youth and Family Services Foundation Stakeholder Meeting Report and Discussion. Yeah, I can start. So the group met earlier this week. It was seemed to be a bit smaller group. There are 2 possible proposals kind of rolling forward at this point, while still looking at some other options. One is kind of maintaining current levels of services for youth and family services. Option B would be kind of maintaining and adding specific things around safety, which could be things like school resource officers or additional counselors, things like that. There is a group that's looking into the King County Library option of exiting out of King County Library, just to have a sense of what that would look like and what that process would look like and whether it would be beneficial And predominantly, just so everybody in the working group has a sense as to, we can answer that question and say, it was looked into, and here's kind of where the information fell. And there's still a couple other options. We learned that Youth and Family Services is now piloting a program, or is starting to pilot a program where they're going to try attempting some billing options to see if they can reclaim some of the funding that way, and how that might work within the school district. So it's interesting following that, the general sense from Jody Chris, who's the president of the Youth and Family Services Foundation, seemed to indicate that if at any point along the way they feel that they're losing student engagement with the process because of that, then they would probably end the pilot most likely and revert back to what they've been doing before. But it would be engaging in a financial model, that sliding scale that they would normally do, because that was a request of members of the community that they look into that model. So they're looking at it as an option.
And I think the initiative for that came from the director to initiate that pilot study. I think our stakeholder group pretty much had the request of looking into the logistics of that. It wasn't necessarily pushing it one way or the other, but we knew it was going to be a potential question. So the fact that MIYFS has already implemented that, that's really more of a response of their administrative people.
And I think kind of the reason I'm talking more, because I, again, have stayed as much hands-off as I can, even though sometimes I can't help get my opinion in there. But whereas Director Jorgensen has been working with one of the work groups and providing some support in there, so you're a little more enmeshed into that. So we're looking at 2 dates, and did the group set those dates, or they're just to be on your radar, a date where the group can get together and do their internal kind of elevator pitches of the different proposals, and ask questions and fine-tune that, which will then lead to a community event, either at the Community Event Center or somewhere where members of the community can come in, can hear those pitches, can provide feedback and information as we begin to see what option might be palatable. The group is somewhat fast-tracking on the thought that if it's going to go into potentially a November ballot, August, November, then that request from the work group would need to start happening sooner than later. If there's any chance of influencing the city council to move forward in that direction and providing them all of the time that they would need to do all the proper paperwork.
I think you did a nice job summing it up. I don't have anything to add. Any questions?
You might not know the answer. Is the pilot project for billing, is that our students at school, or is that YFS in general?
The best person to talk to about this is going to be Cindy Goodwin or Derek Franklin there. I think part of it, they were looking at maybe doing 2 or 3 set clinical sessions in each day. That would be more of that ongoing regular work like you would see at Luther Burbank offices. And then that would trigger that billing, that the student would opt in, and on that sliding scale, what they could afford, they would do.
So they're already using that process with their clients that they serve at Luther Burbank. And so they did have a discussion with Fred and I a while back about, how this would look in the school system. It's a pilot. Cindy Goodwin is actually out on medical leave right now, so our contact is Derek Franklin. They're trying it. We don't have much with this. They're going to have to do a lot of training because their school counselors have not used this model before. So where they're going to implement it and how specifically they're going to work it is, I think, all part of the pilot and how well it's going to move forward. But they already do kind of have the model set up in their Luther Burbank facility.
And I think it'd be fair just to add that I think there was some concern amongst people hearing that, just recognizing that it was asking a lot more of those mental health counselors in their schools to be doing that clinical work while also in a way diluting their time for other things, which people totally value. But at the same time, we recognize that this is, the city's current pilot in terms of trying to figure out their short-term sustainability under the current financial pressures that they've got.
And a big part of the pilot seems to be it's going to get some data that they can look at and study to see just how viable is it. And again, we're hearing this through Jody Chris predominantly, who's the president of the Youth Family Services Foundation. And so I don't want to put that all on her shoulders, because she has this huge task on top of the rescheduled breakfast that's coming up next week. Next week, right?
Yeah.
Yes. But the consensus seemed to be that if at any point it looked as if this was hindering students from getting help, that they would likely end that pilot, and that everyone, just as we would be concerned that any student that is showing signs of needing help or whatever is going to get the help they need regardless of this pilot.
I had a question regarding the King County Library relationships. Or they're thinking that if we pulled out of the King County system and had our independent library, that we would save money that could then be spent on counselors?
It's the general thought that kind of bubbled up through the community, which is the coalition is responding to, is the numbers are around $5 million paid in to the system, and
I
the
think
payback not as much.
I think it'd be fair for us not to go into those details, because this is kind of the city's turf. But
right.
But just the idea that some people in the community believe there could be some efficiencies gained by an alternative library provider.
I just want to make sure that we're
nothing
making
else,
that connection, because
taxpayer
otherwise it's
relief
like, what does
just
that mean?
on its own.
Right. Yeah.
Whether or not any money would actually come back to the city.
Or whether or not it would be
But the
a
coalition
valuable
is looking
trade-off.
into that and is trying to engage subject matter experts on what that process would look like, just so that they can say at that community meeting, we did look at this option, and really here's what that looks like. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Or all right. Okay, then let's move on to 7C, inquiries and reports. Do you want to go first? Or would you?
I'm fine.
Okay.
Sorry. I'll just say looking forward to seeing people at the MIYFS breakfast next week. I guess it's the 6th. And keep the school's foundation breakfast on your radar as well, coming up in April.
And I'm looking forward to our site visit at my my school that I'm a liaison for, Island Park, next week. And also the candidate information session. I hope we get to see some great potential candidates at that session. I also wanted to say that it came to my attention that some people interpreted the announcement that there are board openings to mean that the directors in positions 1, 3, and 5 were not running again. But I think we're starting to hear some clarity on that, as there was a letter from Ralph in the Reporter this week, and I wanted to announce here tonight that I'm not planning to seek re-election either, and I think it's helpful for us to let people know that, so that they hopefully will show interest in coming to our candidate information sessions. And so it's a great way to serve our community, and it's wonderful. 4 years has been a good amount of time for me, and due to some personal responsibilities increasing, I'm going to need to take a step back from my service to our community at this time, but doesn't mean I won't be active in other ways. So just wanted to let you all know that.
I did not know that. Thank you for your service. And I had a letter to the Mercer Island Reporter yesterday that was published, and in a way I apologize for not letting you know firsthand, like Director Drinkwater. But I too am not seeking re-election. It's truly been an honor and a privilege, and I won't go into the details, but it truly has been an honor and a privilege. I've learned a lot about this process, and would really encourage other people in the community to think about this. It's really a good thing. And we had this forum scheduled as part of board policy, regardless if there were open positions anyways, because we want to encourage people to run, and contested is good. All I can say is I've worked in industry, I've worked in universities, and or university, and it's just seeing the people that are associated with the school district, the professionalism, the dedication. People are here for all the right reasons, and I always mention how grateful we are to our community for supporting education. But in a way, it's really been enlightening to me to know how grateful we should be for all these professionals to choose to work at our school district for our kids. So, thank you.
I don't have anything to report.
Okay, so since our last meeting, I did attend the high school parent advisory committee meeting. We got some updates on school safety. Principal Puckett updated the group on the new vestibule work, and I was able to provide feedback from the meeting of the scheduling changes, how that's because of Snowmageddon. And then I'm trying to think of our meeting with city leadership. Did I report on that last? Yeah, I did. I between the hospital stay and Snowmageddon and the midwinter break, I'm just not quite up to speed yet. I'm having a hard time this week. So yeah, that's pretty much it for my report. Other than to say to the two of you, thank you so much for your service, and we have a long stretch to go yet. But
We have a long stretch to go. There'll be plenty of time to say goodbye.
I appreciate that you've got to put your needs of your families and yourself first, but it's sad news. So. Okay, so that covers everything. We're down to Section 8A, motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? No? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, then it is 7:17 and we are adjourned.